Welcome to episode 651 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and can you believe it? It is another Friday of a top 5 news dump. Was there enough to do 5 headlines this week of news? I don't know. But after the Benfica match, I do feel a little bit like a puppy with the zoomies, so I had just more energy to get out before the weekend's match against Valencia, so that's why I'm talking to you now. For those watching on YouTube, I also, for 3 straight weeks of top 5, I have a little bit of a nerdy nugget there for you in terms of my attire. So, hey, let me know in the comments section if you're watching on YouTube what my little cheeky nerdy nod was for everybody. And in the meantime, for everyone else, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, give a like, leave a comment if you're listening on the podcast apps and you have me in your ears. A good rating would be great there, as well as help me out as my new top tier Patreons have done, in Nicholas and Tiana. As low as $3, though, so not top tier, but as low as $3, you can help me continue to make these shows. Or, hey, grab something on the merch store, or bare minimum, just tell anybody about this show and join me on Sunday on Big Up for the match against Valencia. That's 3 p.m. East Coast time. In the meantime, let's dive into another week of, well, not really top 5 even, but just 5 stories that you should know in the Barcelona universe. The first big of news this week is, of course, the Araujo renewal being official. And the fact that it is official does kind of put the third and final chapter of the trilogy of these top 5 Friday news dumps I've been doing for the last 3 weeks, because it was exactly 3 weeks, basically, that this was all wrapped up. A big problem. He was the closest it seemed like he'd ever been to leaving the club, and now it's completely the other direction, and he's renewing for the long term. So again, not only does it look like he is not going to Juventus in January, it also doesn't appear like he's going to be revisiting a move away in the summer, which is why we thought he'd initially agreed to this kind of contract. In fact, it is quite the opposite. The Uruguayan appears to be staying at the club for the long haul now, officially signing that extension that runs through 2031. Now, what could still be true is that he did agree to a lower release clause, which does make a bit of sense. He reportedly had a 1 billion, yes, that's a 1 billion euro release clause, which means it, even for any club who wants to potentially play in UEFA Champions League competition and keep with a wage bill or with their revenue and expenses being anywhere near equal, they wouldn't be able to put forth the amount of cash necessary for a 1 billion euro release clause. And that is on the contract he signed in April of 2022, as the club were desperate at the time to make sure no huge money bag club offers came to sign away, in particular, Araujo and Pedri, who signed his last deal in October of 2021 with the same release clause, and that's why you're also seeing a buzz about him renewing soon as well. Araujo does make a reported 7 million euros yearly, so even if the club per wages were to double that, he'd move just above Koundé at 13.55 on the wage bill, which, if I had to guess, that's probably the move here. Or he negotiated for something like 11 or 12 to pair with the lower release clause, depending on what that number is. My guess is if it's a attainable release clause, it'd be around 100 million, because remember, while Neymar did help pay the rest of his release clause to PSG, Araujo hasn't made nearly the same amount of money in his career on sponsors and brand deals. So he may not have the personal funds to help out with his own release clause in case somebody wants to come and steal him away from Spain. That is all a very boring way to say that I really hope that the 25-year-old stays healthy and sustains his level in the defensive aspects of the game and continues to improve on his ball-playing abilities. If he does all that, his improved contract would be a steal for Barcelona. And maybe the best news for Araujo this week, not just the extension and contract and all of that being put to bed for Barcelona, but he also did get engaged. So congratulations to the Uruguayan big man. Now, at least with this new contract, he can definitely pay for that wedding. Our second piece of news involves Eric Garcia, and he is staying at the club, but this story about Eric Garcia staying also kind of broadens to giving us updates about Ansu Fati and Marcus Rashford as well. It seems like, talking about finances, the club is pretty okay with keeping Eric Garcia around on his 6 million euro a year wages on the books instead of trying to ship him out and get a player who could help out in the immediate term instead. Honestly, 6 million in salary to get a useful player is a lot easier said than done. And honestly, I think for Eric Garcia, the 24-year-old has earned his place this season. He has the 2 goals in his 17 appearances, but he's also been a really useful substitute due to his versatility in the midfield or along the back line, especially like what we saw against Benfica when he came in as a right center back with a 3 at the back, kind of help out Araujo ball playing late in game situations when you want to really push the envelope forward. And maybe he's going to be the option instead of Hector Fort going throughout the remainder of the season as the backup for Koundé, because Hector Ford is still a young player. He will get his time, but this club wants experienced players to win some trophies. His staying is also probably telling for both Fati and Rashford sagas, because as I mentioned last Friday, salary-wise, Barcelona need to get rid of both Ansu and Eric. Not just one, but both, to bring in Rashford's wages. So with Ansu not leaving, there really wasn't a reason to push out Eric if he wanted to stay. And I don't know why he would have wanted to go either. I think the moves to Girona, who were heavily linked to him on loan this January, or Como, the Italian club managed by Cesc Fabregas, I talked about last week in relation to Alex Valle, who wanted him permanently. Yes, they would have offered him a starting spot. Maybe Girona offered him a starting spot, but it still would have been similar competition, and Girona and Como, at this rate, are not going to be winning any trophies this season. So I guess this won't be the last image of Eric Garcia we get at FC Barcelona. Yeah, it would have been a nice moment for Culés, but holding up a few more trophies would probably be a much better way for the player to end his career, and I guess much more lasting images for his legacy. Our third piece of news is about Pau Cubarsi celebrating his 18th birthday, but it really has nothing to do with a birthday, and more of an excuse for me to talk about just how unprecedented Pau Cubarsi is. Now, we know with Lamine Yamal, I made a video about him a few weeks ago, and the world certainly does give him the buzz and talks about him aplenty. But I just want to bring up here, as one of our 5 headlines, just how ridiculous and crazy it is that he is an in-pen starter for FC Barcelona along that back line, playing more games this season than anyone else in the squad. That's pretty insane to do for a 17-year-old who made his debut just over a year ago last week. It is interesting, too, how media is talking about Cubarsi, and I do want to throw my 2 cents in here. As an 18-year-old center back for Barcelona, it is practically impossible to overrate him in terms of what he's doing at that age. To criticize him is an absurdly delicate task, and those, not even those who disagree with Barcelona, but those who just want to be very objective about what they're seeing, they have gained the ire of Culés, who feel like he should not be criticized that much, because even with all his mistakes, which he makes very few of, they can be seen as a learning experience, so he does have this shell of protection around him. Even Tuesday against Benfica, it wasn't his best defensive match, and I was critical of him, but I do find myself even kind of throwing those things to the side because he's just been so much better than any 18-year-old should be, and what he gives you on the ball almost makes up for the defensive mistakes. Even against Benfica, Koundé and Szczesny, 2 very experienced players, were probably worse. Yet, Cubarsi is still very much a work in progress. If he still hasn't hit his ceiling in that part of his game, which we should assume that he hasn't, Barca are in a really good spot for the future. That backline of Balde, Cubarsi, Araujo, and Koundé should now have the rest of this season to nail down the foursome partnership for even next year and do the one thing that Flick's backline hasn't been able to do this season, and that is be consistent. Now, the goalie in that situation does matter a whole bunch, and I don't think that back four is going to get the consistency in net that they would expect, but hey, you've got to make do with what you have with those 4. As for the offensive side of the ball, there is a reason he started 45 games and played 55 already for the club. In the modern game, where tempo must be accelerated to find space against stout defenses, or the tempo must be controlled when necessary, finding a center back that can read the game as well as Cubarsi already does and can play the ball required to do both, that is irreplaceable already. Look at this graph from The Athletic. These are open play passes of 15 yards or more, and I want you to take a look at that bottom right one. If Barca want to control matches, they need to have the ball. And to play with that high line, you have to move the line of confrontation as high into the opponent's half as possible, giving your counterpress the least amount of space to cover to capture the ball back. But you don't want to lose the ball on purpose. If you're in the opponent's half of the field, there isn't much space vertically. We can talk about Pedri and just how amazing he is when you have to break through very limited vertical space, but the space you have to use horizontally, that really focuses on the back line. I've talked extensively about Lamine Yamal and his ability to create width with just his presence. I made a video all about that a few weeks ago, but Cubarsi's diagonals to the left are essential to opening up that left side of the field. Switching the ball quickly, especially when the defense is overcompensating to the right to deal with Lamine Yamal, that will need to be Barca's bread and butter for hopefully a decade plus. Now, if Cubarsi is going to be on that left long term and play next to Araujo on the right, well, that'll be something I'll be looking for as to how those diagonals get off from that right to the left. Is it all going to be on Araujo, or will Cubarsi and Araujo figure out some kind of permutation where Cubarsi is delivering those balls from both sides of the back line? Our fourth piece of news is about Gerard Martin renewing, so sticking with that back line. Maybe a lot less of fanfare when it comes to these renewals, but Gerard Martin, along with Araujo, was the other one to renew this week, a month shy of his 23rd birthday. The renewal with the club is until 2028, and his deal had to get done a bit quicker than the other extensions because his contract was expiring on June 30th. And after being scouted for Barça Athletic for his standout appearances for Cornellà, he signed for the B team last season, making the jump to the first team with a Barça Athletic number and contract this season. So he has been making pennies. And so even to make the 18 appearances he's made with the first team this season, and even if you're not totally sold on him, he's been a bargain as the backup left back for the money he's made. Consider what Barcelona were paying Marcos Alonso last season to be the backup left back, and now consider this season how much they saved on very similar performances with Gerard Martin. And it does appear that he will continue for the remainder of this season to stay registered with the reserve team and continue to wear the number 35. Now, his contract renewal doesn't mean that he'll be with the first team next season. If another team does want him, I'm going to assume that his release clause will definitely be low enough for another team to pounce. Or at least it'll be something that terms can be agreed on for an exit. Or he'll just go on loan because his wages are not going to be so high that he can't be loaned out, and he could do that for up to 3 seasons. And then Barcelona can revisit with him every summer to see where he is at in his progress. And narrowing these renewals down even farther, speaking of left back renewals, Jofre Torrens, the 17-year-old left back with Juvenil A, also recently renewed his contract, and I'll definitely be talking about him in the very near future, so make sure to look out for that, whether it's on Barca blog, on the website, YouTube channel, podcast, whatever. I will definitely be talking about Torrens, because between Alex Valle, who we have no updates about a Como loan or anything like that, and Gerard Martin and Torrens, for the next 2 to 3 seasons, Barcelona should be able to find an in-house backup to Alejandro Balde. Who that is of the 3, I'm not really sure. And then our last piece of news is about the Barça Femení heading to the Spanish Super Cup. This is your weekly Barcelona Femení update, and is that while Real Madrid and Barcelona on the men's side of things, they just finished up their Spanish Super Cup final a few weeks ago. Now the women are going to be doing that on Sunday. Real Madrid, led by special Colombian attacker, 19-year-old Linda Salcedo, beat Real Sociedad 3-2. Salcedo's goal in the 71st minute was the difference, so she is the player to watch, certainly. For Barcelona against Atletico Madrid the day before, Claudia Pina, who is all of 23 years old herself, she was a difference maker, scoring a brace. But Atletico Madrid did make Barcelona fight for it like the mid-2010s, right, as women's football was getting professionalized in Spain. 2016, 17, 18, Atletico Madrid were winning some of the first division titles during that time. Real Madrid wasn't a thing yet, remember? So it was basically Barcelona against Atletico Madrid for the title, with Levante trying to give a little bit of a push too. Those days are gone for Atletico Madrid, but hey, they're still a talented team. They had their chances, but so did Barcelona in that first half. Walsh and Pariello both had good games, but it was Pina who finally got the breakthrough right before halftime. She had another in the second half with a nice little half volley, and then Graham Hansen put in the third in stoppage time to put the game to bed. The weird thing about this match and why you're hearing a bit of buzz is that obviously after the Women's World Cup, when Spain won it all, a lot of players for the Barça Femení and the Spanish Federation, they don't really see eye to eye on a lot of things. So a lot of these Femení players were pretty frustrated they were let down by the Federation again, albeit on a much, much smaller scale here, because VAR did not work for the first 70 minutes of the match, but then it did for the last 20 minutes, which doesn't really affect the way the players are playing. But Pere Romero, the manager, wasn't too happy about the fact that rules kind of changed on the fly. And yeah, it's just more sloppiness in regards to the women's game from the Federation. I'll remind you for the Clásico on Sunday that the last time these two teams met this season, it was a 4-0 win for Barcelona. But hey, you can't celebrate a trophy until it's in your hands. So all the best of luck to the Femení on Sunday. And lastly, speaking of Sunday, you can join me on Big Up as Barcelona take on Valencia at 3 p.m. East Coast time. So again, join me on Big Up for that one. That is in the description below or the show notes. You can just become a member for free, and then you'll get notifications when I'm going to go live, which I usually do for most matches. I'll let you know when I'm not. I like a bunch of the players in Valencia's team, but they are completely stinking up the joint this season and almost certainly going down. Yet, they're actually on a 4-game unbeaten streak at the moment between the Copa del Rey and the Liga, and they did sneak by Real Sociedad last Sunday 1-0. They scored sort of early in that game, and then they shut it all down. And I'll tell you, after Getafe last week, I am not looking forward to watching a match like that. So hopefully Barcelona score early. I guess that'll be my prediction for this one. Barcelona, please just score early, take care of business against Valencia, and get your 3 points and move on. So I will see you on Sunday. And as always, until next time, Forza Barça.